The Mafia boss had been frozen for a decade. Not dead, but not alive either. Year 10, day 1, the medical display read in cold LED letters. His empire had crumbled. His enemies had grown bold. His brother had taken everything. But there was one thing no one knew. He could hear every word, every betrayal, every plan to pull the plug. Consciousness without movement was the cruelest prison imaginable. That morning, a new cleaner entered his medical room. She was unremarkable, forgettable, invisible, just the way his staff preferred. She mopped quietly around the machines, keeping him breathing, while his doctor and brother discussed selling his final territory right beside his bed. They laughed. They didn't even lower their voices. The room emptied. Silence settled like a shroud. Then she did something unthinkable. She approached his bed, set down her mop, and looked directly into his eyes, not at him, but into him. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through 10 years of darkness. "I know you can hear them." Darius King's finger twitched. Just once. Just enough. And in that moment, the most powerful man in the city realized his salvation had just come from the one person everyone refused to see. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will shatter the criminal underworld that thought him dead. Darius King had ruled the city with an iron fist. Every politician, every judge, every street boss bent the knee or disappeared. For 27 years, his name alone had been enough to end wars, settle debts, and guarantee absolute obedience. The King crime family didn't just control territory, they controlled fate itself. But that was 10 years ago. Now, the King mansion stood like a mausoleum on the hill. The same marble floors, the same crystal chandeliers, the same armed guards patrolling corridors that once buzzed with power. Everything looked the same, but everything had rotted from within. The medical wing occupied what used to be the East Conservatory, where exotic plants once grew, monitors now beeped, where afternoon light once filtered through stained glass, fluorescent tubes now hummed with clinical indifference. And in the center of it all, connected to machines that breathed for him, lay Darius King. Gray hair that had once been jet black, a jawline still sharp despite a decade of stillness, fair skin that had grown pale from years without sunlight, thin lips that hadn't spoken since the assassination attempt that shattered his spine and left him in what doctors called a persistent vegetative state. The medical staff came and went with the emotional investment of mechanics servicing a car. They checked vitals, they adjusted IVs, they wrote notes on clipboards and collected their generous paychecks. None of them looked at his face anymore. Why would they? The man was a vegetable, a very expensive, very well-guarded vegetable. Victor King, Darius's younger brother, had assumed control with practiced grief and hidden ambition. He made all the right sounds about hoping for recovery, while systematically dismantling everything Darius had built. Territories sold, alliances broken, loyal men replaced with Victor's puppets. The mansion operated like a stage production. Everyone played their role. The guards stood at attention, the household staff maintained the illusion of a functional empire, and in the medical wing, the sleeping king served as a convenient excuse for every decision Victor made. The boss would have wanted this, Victor would say, signing away another piece of Darius's legacy. Sloane Whitaker started her first day on the autumn morning that marked exactly 10 years since Darius's last conscious moment. She had been hired through the usual channels: background check, references, a cursory interview with the head of household staff who seemed more interested in her willingness to keep her mouth shut than her cleaning abilities. The pay was exceptional, The work was straightforward. The rules were simple. Be invisible, be efficient, and never, ever gossip about what you see or hear. Sloane had worked for wealthy families before, but nothing like this. The mansion felt heavy, oppressive, like walking through a beautiful tomb. Armed men watched her from the shadows. Cameras tracked her movements through every corridor. The other staff members barely made eye contact, as if acknowledging each other might somehow break the spell keeping them employed. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, walked Sloane through her duties with military precision. Guest rooms first, common areas second, kitchen last, and the medical wing, that required special permission, special training, special discretion. "You don't speak to him," Mrs. Chen instructed, her voice flat and rehearsed. "You don't touch him. You clean around the equipment, you empty the waste bins, you mop the floors. That's all." Can he, Sloane started to ask. "He's been gone for 10 years, Mrs. Chen cut her off. "What's left is just a body. The family keeps him comfortable out of respect. That's all you need to know." But when Sloane first entered the medical wing that afternoon, she saw something the others had stopped seeing. Not a body, not a vegetable, a person. A man trapped in absolute helplessness, surrounded by people who had given up on him or were actively hoping he'd die. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. The ventilator hissed. The IV dripped its clear fluid into his veins. And Darius King lay there, still as death, while his world rotted around him. Sloane began her routine. She worked methodically, just as she'd been taught. Dust the surfaces, wipe down the equipment, empty the bins. Don't look too closely. Don't think too hard. Just clean and move on. But something made her pause. Dr. Reeves, the private physician who managed Darius's care, stood by the IV pole, checking his phone with one hand while holding a syringe in the other. He wasn't looking at the dosage, wasn't checking the chart, just casually injecting something milky white into the IV line while scrolling through his messages. The doctor left without washing his hands, without recording the injection, without even a second glance at his patient. Sloane's heart hammered. She'd worked in care facilities before. She knew protocols. Whatever that injection was, it wasn't standard procedure. She approached the IV pole slowly, checking the bag, looking for labels, trying to understand what she'd just witnessed. Her eyes drifted from the machinery to the man in the bed, and Darius King's eyes were open. Not just open, focused, locked on her with an intensity that stopped her breath. Gray eyes that were supposed to be vacant stared at her with crystal-clear awareness, trapped, conscious, screaming silently for someone to notice. Sloane's hand moved to her mouth. 10 years. 10 years of doctors, nurses, family members, guards. How had no one seen this? The answer came immediately. They hadn't wanted to see it. She glanced at the door. Empty. The guards were at their posts down the hall. The medical staff had finished their rounds. She was alone with a man everyone believed was brain dead. A man who was very much aware. Her voice came out barely louder than breath. "Can you hear me?" One slow, deliberate blink. The world tilted. Sloane had just stumbled into a conspiracy that had lasted a decade, and the most dangerous man in the city's history had just made her his only ally. Sloane learned the rhythm of invisibility within her first week. Wake at 5, arrive at the mansion by 6, change into the gray uniform that marked her as staff, disappear into the background of other people's lives. The guards treated her like furniture. They continued their conversations as she mopped around their boots, discussing territory disputes and collection routes as if she were deaf, or stupid, or simply too insignificant to matter. "Victor says the Southside deal closes Friday. Gonna make him a fortune," one guard told another while Sloane cleaned the marble floor between them. Darius would have never sold that territory, but the old man ain't exactly in a position to complain. They laughed. Neither one glanced her way. Victor King himself passed her in the corridors without acknowledgement. She'd press herself against the wall to let him by, eyes down, hands clutching her cleaning supplies. He walked like he owned the air itself, which technically he did now. Once she'd made the mistake of speaking, a simple "good morning" as he approached. Victor had stopped, looked through her rather than at her, and continued walking as if she'd been a ghost attempting conversation. Mrs. Chen pulled her aside later that day. Staff doesn't speak unless spoken to, especially not to Mr. Victor. Remember your place. Sloane remembered. Her place was nowhere. Her place was the space between visible and gone. The medical wing became her strange refuge. At least there, the disrespect was honest. The guards posted outside barely glanced at her badge anymore. The nurses treated her like a necessary inconvenience, stepping around her mop bucket without a word. And Darius never looked through her. Not anymore. She'd catch his eyes tracking her movement as she worked, following her from the supply cabinet to the waste bin to the window ledge, always aware, always watching, always trapped behind a body that refused to obey him. The details of his condition haunted her during those first days. The way his chest rose and fell in the mechanical rhythm determined by the ventilator, the way his fingers lay perfectly still against the white sheets, no tremor, no twitch, nothing to suggest the awareness burning behind his eyes. His gray hair had been combed straight back from his forehead, revealing a high, intelligent brow. Someone, probably one of the nurses, kept him shaved, but not carefully. Small nicks marked his jawline where the razor had been careless. She noticed everything. The medical bracelet that listed allergies no one would ever need to know, the slight pressure sore forming on his left shoulder from improper positioning, the way the afternoon light hit his face and made him look less like a crime lord and more like someone's father, someone's friend, someone who'd been forgotten. Sloane began staying later than her shift required. She'd volunteer for the evening rounds, the times when the medical wing emptied and the skeleton crew took over. Fewer people meant fewer eyes, fewer questions about why the cleaner lingered near the comatose patient. It was during one of these late shifts that she found the logbook. The medical waste bin needed emptying, standard procedure. She pulled the bag, tied it off, and noticed a small notebook wedged between the bin and the wall. It must have fallen during the day shift chaos. The leather cover was worn, the pages dog-eared. Sloane glanced at the door, empty, then opened it. Dr. Reeves's handwriting filled the pages, dosage notes, timestamps, medication schedules that went back years. Her eyes scanned the entries, trying to make sense of the medical shorthand. Then she saw it, a dosage that made her breath catch. Midazolam, 15 milligrams IV every 6 hours. She'd worked in care facilities. She knew sedatives. 15 milligrams every 6 hours wasn't maintenance for a coma patient. It was enough to keep a conscious person chemically paralyzed. Her hands trembled as she flipped backward through the pages. The dosage had been consistent for the past 8 months. Before that, it was lower. Before that, lower still. Someone had been systematically increasing Darius's sedation, keeping him quiet, keeping him still, keeping him trapped. Sloane's eyes lifted to the man in the bed. He was watching her. Those gray eyes tracked from the notebook in her hands to her face with an expression that spoke volumes. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd been experiencing it every day for months, maybe years. The implications crashed over her like a wave. This wasn't a medical necessity. This was a prison sentence. Someone wanted Darius King alive enough to maintain appearances, but unconscious enough to never interfere. She thought of Victor's confident stride through the mansion, his casual assumption of power, his complete lack of concern about his brother's condition improving. The logbook felt like evidence in her hands. Evidence of what, exactly? Attempted murder, medical malpractice? She was a cleaner with a high school education going up against a crime family's private physician. But she couldn't unknow what she'd just learned. Sloane tucked the logbook into her cleaning cart, buried under rags and spray bottles. She approached Darius's bed slowly, aware of the cameras, but knowing they only captured footage, not audio. "I found something," she whispered. "I don't know what to do with it yet, but I found it." One slow blink, then another, and if she wasn't mistaken, the faintest trace of hope flickered across his face before the sedatives dragged him back under. Sloane finished her shift in silence, but as she left the medical wing that night, she knew her invisibility had just become the most dangerous weapon in the mansion. The night shift was a different world, quieter, darker, the kind of darkness that made secrets feel safer and dangers feel closer. Sloane had volunteered for the overnight rotation without explanation. Mrs. Chen had looked surprised, but didn't argue. Good staff were hard to find, especially ones willing to work the graveyard hours when the mansion felt more like a crypt than a home. The medical wing at 2 a.m. existed in a strange twilight. The monitors provided the only consistent light, their screens painting everything in shades of green and blue. The guards outside had grown lazy, one of them asleep in his chair, the other absorbed in his phone. Sloane moved through her routine with practiced quiet. Dust, wipe, empty. She'd learned to time her presence in Darius's room to coincide with the medication schedules. She needed to see what they were giving him, needed to understand the pattern. The night nurse was new, or at least Sloane hadn't seen her during the day shifts. Mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back severely, the kind of professional detachment that came from seeing too much suffering and caring too little. She entered at 2:15 a.m., carrying a small tray with pre-filled syringes. Standard procedure, except Sloane had memorized the legitimate schedule from observing Dr. Reeves. The next medication wasn't due until 3 a.m. Sloane kept cleaning, head down, mop moving in slow circles near the far wall. Just furniture, just background. Nothing to worry about. The nurse approached the IV pole with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. She checked her watch, glanced at the door, then pulled a syringe from her pocket. Not from the tray. A different syringe, one that hadn't come from the legitimate medication cart. Sloane's heart hammered so hard she was certain the monitors would pick it up. The nurse uncapped the syringe with her teeth, found the injection port on the IV line, started to press the plunger. "Wait." Sloane's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. The nurse froze, turned. Her expression shifted from surprise to annoyance in an instant. "What?" Sloane's mind raced. "I need to empty the catheter bag. Protocol says before medication administration." It was complete nonsense, but the nurse didn't know Sloane's training, didn't know what protocols a cleaner would or wouldn't understand. "It can wait," the nurse said, turning back to the IV. "Mrs. Chen checks the logs. If the timing's off, she'll know. She always knows." The nurse's jaw tightened. She glanced at Darius, then at Sloane, calculating whether this minimum wage cleaner was worth the argument. 5 minutes, she finally snapped. "Then I'm back and you better be gone." She pocketed the syringe and left, her footsteps sharp against the tile. Sloane didn't breathe until the door clicked shut. Her hands shook as she approached the IV pole. The legitimate medication hung there, clear fluid dripping steadily into the line that fed into Darius's arm. She had maybe 4 minutes before the nurse returned. 4 minutes to make a decision that could get her killed. She looked at Darius. His eyes were open, tracking her every movement, watching her with an intensity that made her feel like the only real thing in the room. The logbook had shown increased sedation, but what was in that syringe? More sedatives? Something worse? How long had they been doing this? Her fingers moved before her mind caught up. She reached for the IV line, found the connection point near his arm, and twisted it loose. The drip stopped. The tube disconnected with a soft click that sounded deafening in the silence. "You're being poisoned," she whispered, leaning close enough that her breath stirred his hair. "I don't know by who or exactly what they're giving you, but that wasn't legitimate medication. None of it is. They're keeping you under." She worked quickly, checking the connection, pretending to adjust the sheets if anyone walked in. Her words came faster, more desperate. "I'm going to reconnect this to the saline only. Just saline, nothing else. It'll take time for whatever's in your system to clear, but—" Her voice cracked. "I can't watch them do this to you anymore. I can't." Sloane reconnected the line to a pure saline bag she'd hidden in her supply cart, lifted from the storage closet on her last shift. Her hands fumbled with the tubing. Any second now, the nurse would return. Any second, this would all fall apart. "If you can hear me," she whispered, "if you understand what I'm doing, I need you to trust me. I need you to stay still, stay quiet. Don't let them know anything's changed." She stepped back, checking her work. To a casual observer, everything looked normal. The IV still dripped, the monitors still beeped, the patient still lay motionless. But Darius's eyes had changed. They weren't just aware anymore, they were blazing, fierce, grateful. And for the first time since she'd discovered his consciousness, they were fully, completely open. Not the half-lidded exhaustion of a drugged man, but the sharp clarity of someone waking from a nightmare. His lips moved, just slightly. No sound emerged, but Sloane could read the shape of the word. "Thank you." The door handle turned. Sloane grabbed her mop and stepped away from the bed, heart pounding, certain that the nurse would see everything. The switched bag, the new awareness in Darius's eyes, the guilt written across Sloane's face. But the nurse only glanced at her with contempt. "You done?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then get out." Sloane left, her legs barely holding her weight. She made it to the supply closet before she had to lean against the wall, gasping, shaking, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She had just committed an unthinkable act. She'd interfered with a patient's medical care, stolen supplies, directly countermanded whatever orders Dr. Reeves and Victor had given. And somewhere in that medical wing, Darius King was waking up. The change was subtle at first, so subtle that anyone not watching for it would miss it entirely. By the third night after Sloane switched the IV, Darius's eyes tracked movement with sharper precision. The fog that had dulled his gaze was lifting, burned away by hours of pure saline flushing the sedatives from his system. Sloane worked her shifts in a state of controlled terror. Every footstep in the hallway made her jump. Every time Dr. Reeves entered for his examinations, she was certain he'd noticed the substitution, the clarity returning to his patient's eyes, the slight muscle tension that hadn't been there before. But no one looked closely enough. Why would they? Darius King had been a vegetable for a decade. The staff saw what they expected to see. Nothing. It was during the fourth night that Sloane took the risk. She waited until the medical wing settled into its graveyard quiet. The guards were at their posts, visible through the door's window, but not paying attention. The nurse had finished her rounds. The cameras recorded their silent footage to servers no one monitored in real time. Sloane approached the bed with her cleaning supplies, the perfect cover. She set down her spray bottle and leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "Can you hear me clearly now?" One deliberate blink. Slow, intentional. Her breath caught. "One blink for yes, 2 blinks for no. Can you do that?" One blink. Sloane's fingers trembled as she pulled a small notepad from her pocket, the same one she used for supply inventories. She'd thought about this all day, planned the questions, tried to anticipate what he'd need to tell her most urgently. "Are you in pain?" 2 blinks. "Do you know who's been drugging you?" 1 blink. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is it Dr. Reeves?" 1 blink. "Is Victor involved?" The pause before his response told her everything. Then one slow, bitter blink. Sloane closed her eyes. She'd suspected, but confirmation made it real. Victor had been keeping his own brother chemically imprisoned for years, possibly since the beginning. The nurses, are they all in it? One blink. The guards? One blink. Mrs. Chen, the household staff? He blinked twice, then once. Some yes, some no. Not everyone knew, but enough did. Enough to make the mansion a minefield. Sloane wrote quickly, her handwriting shaky. How long have you been conscious, aware? Darius's eyes moved, trying to convey something numbers couldn't express. She understood. Too long. Years, probably. Trapped in his own body while his empire crumbled, and his brother sold his legacy piece by piece. I'm going to ask you something, Sloane whispered, and you need to understand what I'm risking, what we're both risking. One blink. He understood. If I help you, if I keep giving you saline instead of the sedatives, if I help you get strong enough to move, to speak, they'll kill me when they find out. Victor, Dr. Reeves, all of them. I'm nobody. I'll disappear and no one will ask questions. His eyes locked onto hers with such intensity she had to look away. When she forced herself to meet his gaze again, she saw something that made her heart stutter. Not just gratitude, promise. Can you protect me? She asked. When you're strong enough, when you come back, can you keep me safe from what's coming? One blink. Firm. Absolute. I need more than a blink for this, Sloane said, her voice cracking. I need to know you mean it, that I'm not just useful until you don't need me anymore. Darius's eyes moved down to his right hand, drawing her attention. She watched as his fingers that hadn't moved voluntarily in a decade, twitched. Slowly, painfully, his index finger lifted half an inch off the sheet, then his middle finger. 1, 2, deliberate. He was spelling, using the only language available to him. 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3, 4, 5, back to 1. The pattern continued, each number corresponding to letters. It took nearly 5 minutes, his hand shaking with effort, sweat beading on his forehead from the exertion. L-O-Y-A-L-T-Y. Sloane's eyes burned. You're offering me loyalty? One blink. In exchange for helping you reclaim what's yours? One blink. She thought about her apartment, 3 bus rides away, the $847 in her checking account, the life she'd built on being invisible, unremarkable, safe. All of it would disappear the moment she fully committed to this path. But she thought about the logbook, the casual cruelty of the nurse with her hidden syringe, Victor's contemptuous stride through halls that didn't belong to him, the decade of imprisonment this man had endured while everyone profited from his silence. I'll be your hands, Sloane whispered. I'll be your eyes and ears. I'll get you strong enough to take back what they stole. One blink. But when this is over, when you're back in control, I need your word that I'll be safe, protected, that I'm not just another loose end. Darius's fingers moved again. Slower this time, the effort clearly draining him. Q-U-E-A-N. Sloane's breath stopped. What? His eyes held hers. One blink. He wasn't offering her protection as a servant. He was offering her a place beside him, a throne next to his. That's insane, she whispered. 2 blinks. No, it wasn't. In his world, loyalty like hers was rarer than diamonds. She'd risked everything for a man she barely knew, expected nothing, and asked only to survive. That kind of integrity didn't exist in his empire anymore. Sloane looked at the door, at the cameras, at the sleeping giant before her who was slowly, painfully coming back to life. Then we have a deal, she said. But you need to stay exactly as you are when anyone else is around. No reactions, no responses, nothing that tips them off. One blink. And I need to know, how long will it take? How long before you can move, speak? His fingers twitched. Weeks, maybe. Perhaps longer. The damage from a decade of immobility wouldn't heal overnight. Then we wait, Sloane said, and we watch. And when the time comes, his eyes finished the sentence for her. When the time came, the traitors would learn why you never leave a king for dead. Invisibility, Sloane discovered, was the perfect disguise for espionage. She began volunteering for shift that overlapped with Victor's business hours. Mrs. Chen was delighted to have someone willing to clean the main conference room, the study, the private office where Victor conducted his most sensitive meetings. Most girls don't want to work around the men, Mrs. Chen said approvingly. Too nervous. But you've got a good head on your shoulders. You know your place. Sloane knew her place perfectly, and her place was now everywhere. Victor's first mistake was assuming staff had no ears. His second was assuming they had no memory. The conference room meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon. Sloane entered with her caddy of supplies, while 6 men in expensive suits sat around the mahogany table. Victor presided at the head, looking every bit the king he'd never legitimately become. "We're moving the shipment through the North Dock," Victor said, not even glancing at Sloane as she began wiping down the sideboard. "Pier 17, container marked with the usual stamp. Marco, you'll handle customs clearance." A heavy-set man with gold rings nodded. "Same split as last time?" 70-30, my 70. Victor's tone left no room for negotiation. Sloane's hands moved mechanically across the wood surface. Pier 17. Container. Marco handles customs. 70-30 split. She repeated it silently, burning it into memory. "What about the Southside territory?" another man asked. "The Russians are pushing back on the new terms." Victor laughed. "Let them push. They signed the contract. If they don't like it, they can take it up with Dmitri. Oh wait, Dmitri's at the bottom of the harbor." The men laughed. Sloane sprayed glass cleaner on the mirror, her reflection showing nothing but a bored cleaning woman going through the motions. "The casino revenue is dropping," a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses said. "We're down 18% from last quarter." "Because you're skimming," Victor replied coldly. "Did you think I wouldn't notice, Bernard? 200 grand doesn't just evaporate." Bernard's face went pale. "I can explain. You have 48 hours to return it, with interest, or you'll be explaining to the same people Dmitri talked to." Bernard. Casino. Skimmin'. 48 hours. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes. Sloane cleaned every surface twice, moving like a ghost around the table while they discussed drug shipments, money laundering operations, upcoming territorial expansions. They talked about murder with the casual tone of men ordering lunch. Not once did any of them acknowledge her presence. She began working the study during Victor's phone calls. He'd pace by the window, phone pressed to his ear, while she dusted bookshelves. He never read. "The DA is on board," Victor said into the phone. "Cost me 50 grand, but he'll bury the investigation." "No, not a problem. The witness disappeared. Permanently." Sloane's duster moved across leather spines. DA bribed. 50,000. Witness murdered. "Tell Polly the guns are in the warehouse on Crane Street, Red Building, Unit 34. He moves them by Sunday or I'm docking his payment." Crane Street, Red Warehouse, Unit 34. Sunday deadline. She became a collector of secrets. Every name, every number, every location went into her mental catalog. At night, alone in her apartment, she'd write everything down in a notebook she kept hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary. The dangerous part came after midnight, when she'd transfer that intelligence to Darius. His progress was remarkable. 3 weeks of pure saline had cleared enough of the sedatives that he could move his fingers with increasing coordination, could turn his head slightly, could flex his toes beneath the sheets. He still couldn't speak. His vocal cords needed time to recover, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. Sloane would lean close during her night rounds, whispering her reports while appearing to adjust his pillows or check his comfort. Victor's meeting with the Russians next Tuesday at the Red Star restaurant. He's renegotiating the South Side deal. Marco from Customs is skimming off shipments. Bernard at the casino owes $200,000 he stole. Darius would blink once for confirmation, twice if he needed clarification. His fingers would move in their letter-number code when he had instructions for her. WATCHMARCO. You think Marco's the weak link? One blink. She watched Marco, followed him with her eyes during the rare moments he visited the mansion. Middle management, loyal to money more than people, already stealing from the operation. Exactly the type who'd flip for the right offer. Another night, another report. Victor's planning something big. I couldn't hear all of it, but I heard him mention your name. He told someone on the phone that it's almost time to pull the plug. Darius's entire body went rigid. His hand moved quickly, urgently. WHEN. He didn't say exactly, but soon. He said soon. The rage in his eyes could have melted steel. 10 years of imprisonment, and now his brother was planning to finish the job, to finally kill him and eliminate any possibility of his return. TIMELINE, his fingers spelled. For you to recover? I don't know. Your voice? He shook his head fractionally. Not his voice. The timeline until Victor made his move. Weeks, maybe? He's consolidating power, buying off the last of your loyal people. Once he's secured everyone, once there's no one left who'd challenge him? One blink. Yes, that's when Victor would make it official. A tragic death after a decade of hope. Everyone would call it merciful. Sloane pulled out her notebook, showing him the pages of names and crimes she documented. I've got dirt on half his operation. Marco's theft, Bernard's skimming, the bribes, the murder, enough to turn at least some of them against him. Darius's eyes scanned the pages, and she saw something shift in his expression. This wasn't just intel anymore. This was ammunition. These weren't just secrets, they were weapons. His fingers moved with more confidence now. KEPGOING. There's more you need? One blink. What specifically? LOYALOSTS. Sloane understood. He needed to know who in the organization might still be loyal to the real king, who could be turned back, who would stand with him when he rose. That's harder. Everyone acts loyal to Victor now. WHOHESITATES, Darius spelled. She thought about it. Who hesitated when Victor gave orders? Who looked uncomfortable during the more brutal discussions? Who still called him Mr. Victor instead of boss? There's a man named Thomas, head of your personal guard, or he was. He's been demoted, but Victor keeps him around. He doesn't speak much in meetings, but when Victor talks about you, about keeping you comfortable, Thomas looks away. One blink. He knew Thomas, trusted him. Anyone else? CARLOS DRIVER. I'll watch for him. Over the next 2 weeks, Sloane became a ghost with purpose. She memorized financial records left carelessly on desks. She listened to phone calls about offshore accounts. She noted which men flinched when Victor mentioned his brother's name. And every night, she fed it all to Darius, watching him piece together the puzzle of his stolen empire, planning his resurrection one blink at a time. The human body, Sloane learned, forgot how to move when given no reason to remember. 4 weeks of pure saline had cleared Darius's mind, but his muscles had atrophied from a decade of stillness. His fingers could twitch and spell their Morse code messages, but his arms couldn't lift. His eyes could track her across the room, but his neck could barely turn. If he was going to reclaim his throne, he needed to relearn how to be human. The physical therapy began at 3 a.m. when the medical wing reached its deepest quiet. Sloane would lock the door from the inside, a violation of protocol that would get her fired if discovered, and disconnect the monitoring alerts that would ping the nurse's station if his heart rate elevated. "This is going to hurt," she whispered the first night, gently taking his right arm and bending it at the elbow. "Your muscles haven't worked in 10 years. We have to wake them up slowly." His jaw clenched, but he blinked once. "Do it." She worked methodically, the way she'd learned during her brief time as a care aide before the facility closed. Passive range of motion, flex and extend, rotate at the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist. Each joint protested, each movement drew sweat on his brow. Darius never made a sound, couldn't yet, but his breathing grew labored, his teeth gritted against pain that must have been excruciating. "I'm sorry," she murmured, supporting his arm as she stretched the atrophied muscles. "I'm so sorry." His left hand moved, fingers forming letters against the sheet. Necessary. After the exercises, she'd help him sitting up. The first time, he lasted 8 seconds before his core gave out, and she had to ease him back against the pillows. The second time, 15 seconds. By the end of the second week, he could hold himself upright for nearly a minute, trembling with effort, but upright nonetheless. There was an intimacy to it that neither of them acknowledged, but both felt. Her hands on his body, supporting him, measuring his progress by the warmth of his skin, the strength returning to muscles she'd memorized through repetition. One night, she arrived to find his beard had grown scraggly. The day nurse had been careless again, or maybe deliberately neglectful. It made him look older, diminished, not the king he'd been or the king he'd become again. "I'm going to shave you," Sloane said, pulling supplies from her bag. "The nurse isn't doing it right." She'd bought the razor and cream herself, warmed the water in a thermos. This wasn't part of her job description, wasn't even close to appropriate, but nothing about their situation was appropriate anymore. Sloane lathered the shaving cream between her palms and applied it to his face with gentle fingers. His eyes watched her, unblinking, as she worked the foam across his jaw, his chin, the sharp planes of his face that were beginning to emerge from the softness of disuse. "Hold still," she whispered, though he couldn't have moved if he wanted to. The razor scraped softly against his skin. She worked with careful concentration, one hand tilting his chin, the other drawing the blade in smooth strokes. The intimacy of it struck her, the trust required to let someone hold a blade to your throat when you were helpless to stop them. His pulse beat visibly at his neck, strong, steady, alive. She wiped away the remaining foam with a warm cloth, revealing the sharp architecture of his face. Even weakened, even after a decade of stillness, he was striking. Not handsome in any conventional sense, his features were too severe, too intense, but commanding, the face of a man who'd built an empire on will alone. "There," she said softly, "that's better." Their faces were inches apart. She should step back, should restore professional distance, should remember that he was a patient and she was staff, and this was already dangerous enough without adding complications. But she didn't move. Neither did he, couldn't, she reminded herself, except his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. His right hand trembled on the bed. Slowly, with agonizing effort, his arm lifted. 2 inches, 4, 6. His hand shook with the exertion, muscles screaming from the impossible task of defying gravity. Sloane froze, watching as his hand rose toward her face. She could stop him, should stop him. This was crossing a line they couldn't uncross. His fingers brushed her cheek, barely a touch, a whisper of contact that sent electricity down her spine. It was the first time in 10 years that Darius King had voluntarily touched another human being, and he'd chosen to touch her. His hand fell back to the bed, the effort depleting him. But his eyes burned with something that went beyond gratitude, beyond the alliance they'd formed in desperation. Sloane's hand moved to her cheek, touching the spot where his fingers had been. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Darius," she whispered. His name, not Mr. King, not the boss, just his name. His lips moved, forming words his voice couldn't yet deliver. She watched the shape of them, reading the silent message. "My queen." The words hung between them in the quiet room. A promise, a claim, a future neither of them could guarantee, but both were willing to fight for. Sloane took his hand in hers, feeling the tremor of exhaustion, the strength slowly returning. "Then we'd better make sure you live long enough to keep that promise." One blink, fierce, determined. She helped him through the rest of his exercises with new urgency. Every flex of muscle brought him closer to mobility. Every session added seconds to his endurance. His neck could turn now, following her around the room. His hands could grip, weakly, but grip nonetheless. The romantic tension hung between them like a living thing. Every time she adjusted his position, every time her hand supported his weight, every time their eyes met in the small hours of the morning, it was there, unspoken, undeniable. But they both understood the truth. There was no room for romance in war zone. Whatever was growing between them would have to wait until he could stand on his own, speak his own words, reclaim his own life. Until then, they had work to do. As she prepared to leave that night, Sloane leaned close one last time. "Victor's accelerating his timeline. I heard him tell Dr. Reeves to prepare the paperwork. We have 2 weeks, maybe 3. Darius's hand found hers in the darkness. His grip was weak, but intentional. His message was clear. 2 weeks would be enough. It had to be. The mistake was staying 30 seconds too long. Sloane had been changing the saline bag, a task that should have taken 2 minutes, when she noticed Darius's left leg had developed better muscle tone. She'd paused to check, pressing gently against his calf, feeling the subtle difference that weeks of night exercises had created. Progress, real, measurable progress. She was smiling when the door opened. Victor King stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He wasn't supposed to be here. He rarely visited the medical wing anymore, hadn't bothered to check on his brother in weeks. But there he was, expensive suit, immaculate, eyes cold as winter. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. Sloane's heart stopped. She straightened immediately, hands dropping from Darius's leg. "Checking for pressure sores, Mr. Victor. It's part of the evening protocol." "Is it?" Not a question, an accusation. He moved into the room with predatory grace, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a coffin ceiling. "Mrs. Chen tells me you volunteer for the night shifts, that you spend more time in this room than any other cleaner we've employed. Why is that?" The pay is better for overnight, and it's quieter. I can work more efficiently." "Efficiently?" Victor smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "You're very dedicated. Some might say suspiciously dedicated." Sloane's mouth went dry. "I just do my job, sir." "Do you?" He was close now, too close. She could smell his cologne, expensive and cloying. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you're lingering, like you're attached somehow to a man who's been brain dead for a decade." "I'm not attached. I'm just thorough." Victor's hand shot out, gripping her chin with bruising force. He tilted her face up, studying her like a specimen. "Let me tell you something about being thorough. Thorough people notice things. They ask questions. They sometimes develop opinions about situations that don't concern them." "I haven't." "I'm not finished." His grip tightened. My brother is a vegetable, a very expensive vegetable that's costing this family a fortune in medical care. Soon, very soon, we're going to make the merciful decision to let him go. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sloane understood perfectly. He was telling her Darius would die and she needed to accept it without question. When that happens, Victor continued, I don't want any problems. No concerned staff members talking to authorities. No questions about medications or care quality. Nothing that might complicate a very straightforward situation. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Good. He released her chin with a small shove. Because if I find out you've been doing anything other than cleaning, if I discover you've been interfering in any way with my brother's care, you won't just lose your job. You'll disappear. Women like you vanish every day in this city, and nobody asks questions. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Victor turned toward the bed, looking down at Darius with something that might have been satisfaction. 10 years. 10 years I've waited for this farce to end. I've been patient, respectful, but my patience is... The monitor alarm screamed. Darius's body convulsed. His back arched off the bed, muscles seizing, the monitors erupting in a cacophony of alerts. The heart rate spiked to 180, then dropped to 40, the line on the screen jerking in violent peaks and valleys. Victor stumbled backwards. What the? Sloane moved on instinct, reaching for the call button, but Victor grabbed her arm. Don't. Not yet. He was watching his brother with clinical detachment, as if calculating whether this was convenient or inconvenient timing for a death. Darius's body seized again. Foam appeared at the corner of his mouth. The ventilator alarm joined the chorus as his breathing pattern disrupted the machine's rhythm. Mr. Victor, we have to call the nurse. I said, not yet. His grip on her arm was iron. Let's see how this plays out. Horror washed over Sloane. He was going to let Darius die, right here, right now, going to stand there and watch his brother seize to death because it solved his problem. The monitor screamed. Darius's hand clawed at the sheets, his body rigid with what looked like genuine distress. But his eyes, for just a fraction of a second, his eyes found Sloane's, clear, focused, aware. He was faking it. The realization hit her like lightning. He was creating a distraction, making himself the emergency, so Victor would forget about questioning her, forget about his threats, forget about everything except the immediate crisis. Call them, Victor finally snapped. Call them now. Sloane hit the button. Within seconds, Dr. Reeves burst through the door with 2 nurses, immediately descending on the bed with practiced efficiency. What happened? Reeves demanded. I don't know, Sloane said, her voice shaking, genuinely shaking now. He just started seizing. I was about to leave when... Everyone out, Reeves ordered. Now. I need room to work. Victor grabbed Sloane's arm again, dragging her toward the door. In the chaos, she looked back one more time. Darius's seizure was subsiding, his body relaxing as Reeves injected something into his IV. But before the door closed, she saw it. The smallest movement. Darius's finger lifted once off the sheet, then fell. 1 blink's worth of communication in physical form. I'm okay. Go. In the hallway, Victor rounded on her. If I find out you did something to cause that. I didn't touch anything except the sheets. Sloane's terror was real now, adrenaline making her hands shake. I swear I was just checking his positioning like I always do. Get out of here, now. And if I catch you lingering again, we won't have this conversation a second time. Sloane fled. She made it to the service bathroom before her legs gave out, sliding down the wall, gasping, trembling with the aftermath of pure fear. He'd saved her. Darius had manufactured a medical crisis, had put himself through what must have been agonizing physical stress, had risked Dr. Reeves discovering his improving condition, all to distract Victor from his suspicions about her. The loyalty she'd promised him, he just returned tenfold. But the cost was clear. Victor was watching now, suspicious. One more mistake, one more lingering moment, and she'd disappear into the harbor like Dmitri and all the others who'd crossed him. When Sloane finally made it back to the medical wing hours later for her legitimate cleaning shift, she found a note tucked under the cleaning supplies. Darius must have managed to slip it there during the chaos, or perhaps Dr. Reeves' examination had been brief enough for him to move. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. Worth it. Stay safe. Soon. Sloane pressed the note to her chest, eyes burning. They were running out of time. The announcement came during the morning staff meeting. Mrs. Chen gathered the household employees in the kitchen, her face carrying the practiced solemnity of someone delivering sad but expected news. Sloane stood in the back, cleaning supplies still in hand, a cold dread building in her stomach before anyone spoke. "Mr. Victor has made a difficult decision," Mrs. Chen began. "After consulting with Dr. Reeves and the medical team, he's determined that Mr. Darius has suffered long enough. Tomorrow evening at 8 p.m., they'll be discontinuing life support." The words landed like a death sentence. "It's a mercy," Mrs. Chen continued. 10 years is too long for anyone to exist in such a state. Mr. Victor has been incredibly patient, incredibly hopeful, but it's time to let Mr. Darius rest." Some of the staff nodded sympathetically. Others looked relieved. One less room to clean, one less reminder of the Empire's dark past. No one questioned it. No one dared. Sloane's hands clenched around her spray bottle. Tomorrow evening, less than 36 hours. "There will be a small ceremony," Mrs. Chen said. "Family and senior staff only. The rest of you will have the evening off, paid. Mr. Victor wants privacy during this difficult time." Privacy. How convenient. No witnesses except the ones already complicit in a decade of imprisonment. The meeting dispersed. Sloane moved through her morning routine in a fog of panic. She cleaned rooms without seeing them, mopped floors she'd already mopped, her mind racing through impossible scenarios. Darius could sit up now, could move his arms, could turn his head, but he couldn't walk, couldn't speak more than a whisper, couldn't defend himself against Victor and Reeves and however many guards would be in that room when they flipped the switch. She had to get help, real help, someone outside the mansion, outside Victor's reach. The police? No, Victor owned half the police force. A lawyer? Who would believe a cleaner's story about a conscious mob boss? The media? Victor would have her dead before any story ran. There had to be someone. Thomas, the demoted guard Darius trusted, or Carlos, the driver. Someone who remembered loyalty to the real king. Sloane found Thomas during his lunch break, smoking behind the garage. He was older, scarred, the kind of man who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. "Mr. Thomas," she started, her voice low, "I need to talk to you about Mr. Darius." His eyes sharpened. "What about him?" She stopped, suddenly aware of how insane she'd sound. "Tomorrow night, when they terminate life support, something's wrong about it. The timing, the way they're rushing." "Girl," Thomas's voice was heavy with warning, "you need to stop talking. Right now." "But if you could just—" "I can't do nothing." He crushed his cigarette under his boot. "Victor's the boss now. Has been for 10 years. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you saw, forget it, for your own sake." He walked away, leaving Sloane alone with her desperation. She tried Carlos next, found him washing one of the town cars, earbuds in, deliberately isolated from mansion politics. "Carlos, please. I know you worked for Mr. Darius before." He pulled out one earbud. "I work for whoever signs my checks, and that's Mr. Victor now." "But tomorrow—" "Tomorrow's none of my business," he replaced the earbud. "Yours neither." Sloane's panic crystallized into decision. She'd leave, take the evidence she'd collected, the logbook, her notes, everything, and go to someone, anyone who might listen. There had to be someone in this city not under Victor's thumb. She returned to the staff quarters during the afternoon break, packed her few belongings into a backpack, grabbed her hidden notebook from inside the dictionary. She'd take the service exit, catch a bus, disappear, before the door to her room opened. 2 security guards stood there, faces impassive. She recognized them. Victor's personal detail, not the old guard. Mr. Victor requests you remain on the premises until after tomorrow's ceremony, out of respect. I have a family emergency. I need to... Mr. Victor insists. His hand rested on the weapon at his hip. For your own safety. There's been some unrest in the city. Better you stay here where it's secure. It wasn't a request. It was confinement. My phone, Sloane said. I need to call my sister. Communications restricted tonight. Security protocol. You'll get everything back after the ceremony. They confiscated her phone, searched her bag, found the notebook. The guard flipped through it, his expression darkening. What's this? Grocery lists. Personal notes. He pocketed it anyway. We'll return it after Mr. Victor reviews it. Just procedure. They left her locked in her room. Not overtly, the door wasn't bolted, but she could hear them in the hallway, guards posted at both exits. The mansion had become a prison, and she was now an inmate. Sloane sat on her narrow bed, mind racing. Victor knew. He had to know. The notebook was evidence of her spying, her documentation of his crimes. He was keeping her contained until after Darius died. Then she'd disappear. A tragic accident, a resignation nobody would question. She had no phone, no allies, no way to warn Darius that his time had run out. The afternoon bled into evening. Dinner was brought to her room, another sign she wasn't leaving. The guard who delivered it was young, uncomfortable with the assignment. Is this really necessary? Sloane asked. Locking me in? Orders, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Mr. Victor wants all staff accounted for. After tomorrow, everything goes back to normal. After tomorrow, after Darius was dead and she had followed him. Night fell. Sloane stared at the ceiling, listening to guards change shifts outside her door. The medical wing was 3 floors up and half the mansion away. Darius was lying there, possibly aware that his execution had been scheduled, possibly believing she'd abandoned him. She had to get to him, had to warn him, had to... What? What could she possibly do that would change anything? At midnight, Sloane heard voices in the hallway. Dr. Reeves discussing preparations with Victor. The pentobarbital will stop his heart within minutes. Painless, peaceful. I'll administer it after we disconnect the ventilator. And the girl? Victor asked. What about her? She's seen too much, asked too many questions. After tomorrow, make sure she takes a long vacation, the permanent kind. Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Sloane pressed her fist against her mouth to keep from screaming. They were going to kill them both. Darius first, publicly under the guise of mercy, then her, quietly, where no one would ever find the body. Tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Less than 20 hours, and she was trapped. The day of execution arrived with cruel normalcy. Sloane was released from her room at 6 p.m. with explicit instructions. She would attend the ceremony as household staff, a witness to ensure there were no questions later about procedure. She would stand quietly in the back. She would sign the documentation confirming she'd observed proper protocols. Then she would be escorted off the premises for her vacation. The unspoken part was clear. She'd never return. 2 guards flanked her as she walked through the mansion corridors. The estate felt different tonight, heavier, like the building itself knew something terrible was coming. Staff moved with hushed efficiency, avoiding eye contact, complicit in their silence. The medical wing had been transformed, the harsh fluorescent lights replaced with dimmer, more respectful lighting, fresh flowers arranged on the side tables, a grotesque touch, as if death needed decoration. Chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the bed where Darius lay motionless. Victor stood at the front, flanked by his inner circle. Marco from Customs, Bernard from the casino, looking nervous despite having returned his stolen money, 6 other lieutenants who'd carved up Darius's empire like vultures. Dr. Reeves stood beside the medical equipment, hand resting on the ventilator controls with practiced solemnity. Sloane was positioned in the back corner, a guard on either side. She couldn't run, couldn't signal, couldn't do anything but watch the man she'd fought to save be murdered in front of witnesses who'd call it mercy. Her eyes found Darius. He lay exactly as he had for 10 years, still, peaceful, seemingly unaware. But she'd spent too many nights with him to believe the performance. She could see the slight tension in his jaw, the barely perceptible alertness in his breathing pattern. He knew. He was awake. He was waiting. But waiting for what? He couldn't walk, could barely stand even with support. Was he really going to fight his way out of this room against 8 armed men? Victor cleared his throat, commanding attention. The room fell silent, except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. 10 years ago, Victor began, his voice carrying false emotion, my brother was taken from us, not killed, but stolen, trapped in a prison of his own body, unable to speak, unable to move, unable to live any kind of meaningful life. Sloane's hands clenched. The performance was masterful. Victor looked every bit the grieving brother, burdened by an impossible choice. I've consulted with the finest medical minds. I've held on to hope longer than anyone thought possible. But Dr. Reeves has made it clear. There is no consciousness, no awareness, no chance of recovery. What remains is not my brother. It's a shell kept alive by machines, suffering without purpose. One of the lieutenants nodded sympathetically. The others maintained respectful silence. Tonight, we grant Darius the peace he's been denied. We let him rest. We honor his memory by releasing him from this endless torment. Victor turned to Dr. Reeves. Please, let my brother go. Reeves moved to the ventilator. I'll begin by disconnecting respiratory support. Then we'll administer medication to ensure comfort during the transition. He won't feel any pain. Sloane's vision blurred. This was it, the moment she'd failed to prevent. She'd tried everything, risked everything, and it hadn't been enough. Reeves' hand moved to the ventilator switch. Wait! Darius's voice cut through the room like a blade. The word was rough, barely more than a rasp, but unmistakably clear. Every head snapped toward the bed. Darius's eyes were open, not the vacant stare of a coma patient, the sharp, predatory focus of an apex predator recognizing prey. I said, wait. Stronger this time. His hand moved to the ventilator tube at his throat, gripping it with trembling fingers. Victor's face went white. That's not... You can't... Darius pulled the tube free himself, the motion violent and decisive. He coughed once, twice, then spoke with increasing clarity. 10 years. 10 years I've listened to you sell my empire piece by piece. He's hallucinating, Reeves stammered. The medications. The medications you've been poisoning me with? Darius's hand moved under his pillow, emerging with the compact pistol Sloane had hidden there weeks ago during their night sessions. Those medications? The room erupted in chaos. Lieutenants reached for weapons. Guards moved forward. Victor stumbled backward, his facade of grief shattered into pure terror. Nobody moves. Darius's gun hand was steady despite a decade of atrophy. The weapon tracked across the room with professional precision. Nobody breathes without my permission. He swung his legs over the side of the bed with agonizing slowness. His muscles trembled with effort, but he forced himself upright. Standing. Swaying, but standing. The heart monitor alarm screamed as he disconnected the leads with his free hand. The sound was deafening, apocalyptic. You. Darius's gun centered on Victor. My brother. My blood. You kept me imprisoned, drugged me, stole from me, and tonight, his voice hardened to steel, tonight you were going to murder me. Darius, I can explain. Explain? You've had 10 years to explain. I heard every word, every betrayal. Marco reached for his weapon. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marco dropped, screaming, clutching his shoulder. I said nobody moves. Darius's eyes shifted to Bernard, who froze mid-reach. The next one dies. Dr. Reeves bolted for the door. Another shot. Reeves crumpled, blood blooming across his white coat. The room descended into primal terror. These were men who trafficked in violence, who killed without hesitation. But they'd never faced the thing they'd created. A king they'd thought buried, arised with a decade of rage to unleash. Sloane's guards released her, hands raised, backing away. She ran forward, positioning herself beside Darius as his legs threatened to give out. He leaned on her, transferring some weight, his breath harsh in her ear. "About time you showed up," he whispered. "You knew I couldn't reach you." "I knew you'd find a way." His gun never wavered. "I was right." Victor's bravado had evaporated entirely. He stood there, the great usurper, reduced to a trembling man facing consequences a decade in the making. "The empire you stole," Darius said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm taking back. The men you bought," he gestured to the terrified lieutenants, "are going to remember who the real king is. And you—" "Please," Victor's voice broke. "I'm your brother." "You were my brother." Darius's finger tightened on the trigger. 10 years ago. The shot echoed like thunder. Victor fell. The room fell with him. And in the ringing silence that followed, Darius King, broken, furious, resurrected, reclaimed his throne. The coma was over. The reckoning had begun. The cleanup took 3 hours. Bodies removed, blood scrubbed from marble floors, medical equipment dismantled and hauled away. The mansion's staff worked with the efficiency of people who'd seen violence before and knew better than to ask questions. Marco survived a shoulder wound. Bernard had fled during the chaos and was found hiding in a groundskeeper's shed, begging for mercy he didn't deserve. Dr. Reeves and Victor were gone, their bodies destined for unmarked graves where traitors belonged. By midnight, the mansion had been restored to order, but everything had changed. Darius sat in the main study, his study, reclaimed after a decade of exile, while Sloane wrapped his ribs with medical tape. The effort of standing, of shooting, of surviving had taken its toll. He was pale, shaking with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with fierce vitality. "You need rest," Sloane said, her hands gentle against his bruised skin. "Your body isn't ready for—" "My body is fine." He caught her wrist, holding it against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. "Better than fine. I'm alive. Because of you." "You saved yourself." "No." His grip tightened. "You saved me. Every night, every risk, every moment you could have walked away and chose to stay." Sloane's throat tightened. "I couldn't let them—" "You could have. Anyone else would have." He pulled her closer, his other hand rising to cup her face the way he had weeks ago, but stronger now, more certain. "I gave you back my life, my empire, everything." "I just did what was right." "Exactly." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "In a world where everyone did what was profitable, you did what was right. That's why you belong here, with me." Before she could respond, a knock interrupted them. Thomas entered, the old guard who'd refused to help, now looking decidedly uncomfortable. The men are assembled, everyone who matters. They're waiting. Darius released Sloane slowly, regretfully. Then let's not keep them waiting. He stood with visible effort, refusing Sloane's offered arm. He needed to walk into that room on his own strength, needed them to see that the king had truly returned. The formal dining room had been transformed into a war room. The long mahogany table was surrounded by the remainder of Darius's organization, the men who'd bent the knee to Victor but hadn't actively betrayed their original boss. 15 of them, watching with expressions ranging from fear to relief to calculation. Carlos, the driver, was there. Thomas stood at attention. A few others Sloane recognized from her intelligence gathering, men she'd marked as hesitant, uncomfortable with Victor's reign. Darius entered, and the room fell into absolute silence. He looked like death warmed over, pale, gaunt, moving with the careful stiffness of someone held together by willpower and spite. But there was no mistaking the authority in his bearing, the command in his gaze as it swept across the assembled men. 10 years, Darius said, his voice carrying despite its roughness. 10 years I've been gone. Some of you stayed loyal in your hearts. Some of you bent to Victor because you had no choice. And some of you, his eyes landed on Bernard, profited from my absence. Bernard's face was slick with sweat. I'm not a forgiving man. Darius moved slowly around the table, each step deliberate. But I'm a practical one. My empire was stolen, piece by piece, and I need it rebuilt. Some of you will help me do that. Some of you won't live to see morning. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Thomas. Darius stopped beside the old guard. You were demoted, but never left. Why? Had nowhere else to go, Thomas said honestly, and no stomach for what Victor was building. Your honesty is noted. Darius moved on. Carlos, you drove Victor around for 10 years, heard his conversations, his plans. You'll tell me everything. Yes, sir. One by one, Darius assessed them. Some he dismissed with curt instructions. Others he ordered removed, permanently. Bernard was dragged out screaming. 2 of Victor's closest allies followed. When the purge was complete, 8 men remained, the core of what would become Darius's rebuilt empire. He reached the head of the table and gripped the chair back, swaying slightly. Sloane moved instinctively to help, but he waved her off. There's one more matter. Darius's voice carried new weight. I didn't survive 10 years of imprisonment alone. I didn't walk out of that room on my own strength, and I sure as hell didn't resurrect my empire through force of will. He turned, extending his hand toward Sloane. She froze. Every eye in the room locked onto her, the cleaner, the nobody, the invisible woman who somehow stood at the center of this earthquake. Come here, Darius commanded. Sloane crossed to him on shaking legs. He took her hand, pulling her to his side at the head of the table. This woman risked everything when she had nothing to gain. She was invisible in this house, could have stayed that way, could have let me die and collected her paycheck. Instead, she saved my life, gathered intelligence on my enemies, became my eyes and ears when I had neither. His hand tightened on hers. From this moment forward, Sloane Whitaker is not staff. She is not an employee. She is my partner, my equal, the queen of this empire. Shock rippled through the room. Thomas's eyes widened. Carlos looked between them, processing the impossible elevation. You will show her the same respect you show me. You will obey her commands as you would mine. And if anyone, his voice turned lethal, anyone treats her like less than what she is, they'll answer to me personally. He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw everything unspoken between them. The nights of whispered conspiracies, the touch of his hand on her face, the promises made in silence. "Kneel," Darius commanded. For a moment, no one moved. Then Thomas dropped to one knee. Carlos followed. One by one, the remaining men bent their knees to the resurrected king and the cleaner who'd become their queen. Sloane's vision blurred. This was insane, impossible. She was a woman with a high school diploma and $847 in her checking account, and now 8 dangerous men knelt before her in genuine submission. "Rise," Darius said. They obeyed as one. "Rebuild the territories, restore the operations, find the men who stayed loyal and bring them back. We have work to do." He dismissed them with a gesture. "Go." The room emptied until only Sloane and Darius remained, standing at the head of the table in the mansion that had been his prison and was now his throne room once more. "You really meant it," Sloane whispered. "Queen." "I never say things I don't mean." He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her, despite the pain it must have cost him. "You gave me back my life. The least I can do is give you half my kingdom." "I don't want your kingdom." "Then what do you want?" Sloane looked up at him, this broken, dangerous, resurrected king who'd somehow seen her when everyone else looked through her. "I want you to survive what comes next. I want to finish what we started. I want—" He kissed her. Hard and desperate and full of promises that had waited 10 years to be made. When they finally broke apart, Darius rested his forehead against hers. "We have a city to rebuild. Together." Together. They stood in the study as dawn broke over the city, king and queen, watching their empire wake to a new era. The sleeping king had risen. The invisible woman had claimed her throne, and the world would never be the same.